We're going to do this mini-series on David. So I'm going to be talking about David, the boy shepherd, this morning. David, the shepherd boy. Next week, Andy Colpus is going to be doing David and Goliath. That's a great story. And then finally, Dave Kappelman is going to speak on David the King. Now, it's holiday season, so if you're going to miss one of those, don't forget, you can catch up on YouTube, and I'd highly recommend it because I was so pleased that I listened to Vicky Doherty's talk yesterday, the talk that she gave on July the 2nd, because otherwise I wouldn't have realised that actually the reading was the reading I was going to use, and she talked about David. So she actually stole my thunder a little. So we're going to have to think a little bit differently, and you're going to have to help me with that, I think. Now, it's not the first time that I've had my thunder stolen. Before my ordination training, I had to go to a 2-day Bishop's Advisory Panel, and it's kind of with other people who are seeking ordination and just discerning and testing that out. And it's interviews and interactions, and you kind of watched over lunch and breakfast and dinner. And one of the things you have to do is prepare a talk. And so I prepared my talk, a 3-minute talk, and I did it on leadership. I was told nobody does leadership as a subject, so you'd be absolutely fine. And so it came to the morning when I was going to do my talk. We were all seated around, and they put a card on each seat. I sat on a seat, picked up my card, and it was a 2. I was going second. I thought, that's good. I don't want to, be going 8th. I'm going to go fairly early on. That's great. So the person who went first, I'd spoken with her quite a bit, and she was at HTB, on the staff at HTB. She was a lawyer, really smart person, really, really smart. So she gets up, and she gives this brilliant 3-minute talk on leadership. And what's more, she then goes and asks my questions to the group. So what do I have to do? I have to get up and kind of improvise, give my talk, and then I ask the questions in the negative. So instead of asking about, what positive signs of good leadership have you seen, what signs of poor leadership have you seen? So it was all right in the end. So, as I say, I've got some experience. So instead of doing the reading again, which I think Carol actually read, the reading from 1 Samuel 16, 1 to 13, we're going to just watch this, and then I'll talk a little bit about the reading. So you kind of got the gist of the reading now, right? So Samuel the prophet is tasked by God to go and anoint one of Jesse's sons, and so he turns up and he sees this lineup of Jesse's sons, and he looks at the first one and thinks, hey, this guy looks good, right? To be king, he looks regal. He's tall. He's got all the looks. And the Lord says, it's not him. And then he looks at the next one and thinks, well, okay, maybe it's this son. And God says, no, it's not this son. And so he has 7 sons that pass in front of him. And Samuel knows that the Lord hasn't chosen any of them, so he has to ask Jesse, have you got any other sons? And he said, well, I've got the youngest. He's tending the sheep. Actually, one translation refers to him not as the youngest, but the runt. Like the runt of the litter, which isn't very nice. But he's off working. He wasn't considered to be important enough to be there. But they sent for him, and David is brought back, and he's glowing with health, we're told. He's got a handsome young guy. We think of him as a boy. He'd be a boy in terms of being, in his teens, maybe his late teens, maybe even his early 20s. But he was the youngest of the youngest, and the Lord said, this is the one that I want you to anoint. And so Samuel anointed him, And we're told that from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. So what was it about David? What is it about David, the youngest of the family, the least of the family, that God chose him to be king, a mere shepherd boy? Now, I don't know whether you know any shepherds. Does anybody know any shepherds? No, I don't either. Oh, you do? Brilliant. Wonderful. You're going to be able to help us, actually, because what we're going to do is, but not you alone, we'll try and piece together what a shepherd does, okay? So does anybody know what a shepherd does? What do?
They guard the sheep.
They guard the sheep. They guard the sheep from wolves.
Well, in that country. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really working Morgan hard today because we've got pictures and he's got to find them. And look, he's found some wolves. That's absolutely right, because shepherds actually looked after their sheep, but they had to actually fight sometimes and shoo off wild animals. And there were sort of mountain lions in Israel as well as wolves. So a very, very brave thing for a young boy to be doing, a young man to be doing. Anything else that they do? Steve.
Take them to new pastures so that they find nice fresh grass.
Yes, take them to new pastures, and we're going to find an image for that as well. And Israel and the sort of Judean area was not quite like it is round here. It was quite barren at times, and so are you finding that one, Morgan? No, it's not that one. You've got to find another one. And so they had to go some distances to find that sort of green pasture, particularly at certain times of the year. So here's a shepherd finding green pasture. Right, who else? Anybody over this area has got any ideas about a shepherd? How about you? Do you know what shepherds do?
They protect sheep.
They protect the sheep, yeah. Anything else?
They feed them.
They feed them. Yeah, so I think that we've got some pasture, but the other thing, what else do we need apart from food? Water, exactly. So here we are. Here are sheep being taken down to water, and so the shepherd's job would be to find water for them and get them to drink. Okay. All right, let's go over here further on up and see whether we've got any other ideas on what shepherds do. Any ideas what shepherds do? No. I didn't either. That's why I'm asking. Any ideas what shepherds do? What about lambs? Yeah. What about lambs? We've got a picture of a baby lamb. Yes, this sheep has actually had twins. And so one of the jobs of a shepherd is to keep an eye on the sheep when they're giving birth to their babies, to their lambs. And sometimes they need to help out because poor mum has got 2 lambs inside her with those sort of 4 legs and a hoof. Sounds very painful, doesn't it? Okay. And what else? I think where do you think shepherds stay? Do you think they live in a house and sort of drive in their car to get there? No, what do you think?
Maybe they live with the sheep.
Maybe they live with the sheep. Yeah.
Very nearby.
Yeah. So somebody like David would spend a long time with the sheep, sometimes weeks, particularly if he needed to protect them. And he'd sleep maybe in a tent or find something like this to kind of sleep in. So it was a really committed job, wasn't it? And so being with his family would be a rare sort of occasion. Maybe they'd swap over and another son would go out and take over to give David a rest. But it was quite a thing to be doing for a young man. And in doing all of this, it was very character building. We say that, don't we? When somebody, experiences, I don't know, the shower's cold, and we say, well, that's really character building for you to experience that, or something does, that isn't good happens, and it helps to build our character. And I think there are 4 ways in which David's character was formed, or at least there are 4 ways that I would like to draw out. Firstly, in terms of his heart, it created a really good heart in David, a really compassionate heart, caring for his sheep. And one of the images we didn't look on there was a solitary sheep, because one of the things that he'd be doing is counting and discovering, not counting sheep in order to go to sleep, but counting sheep in order to make sure they were all there. And if they weren't, he'd be off trying to find that lost sheep or those lost sheep. And so it developed in David a great heart, a great compassion, a great love. And God said about David that David was a man after God's heart. The second characteristic that formed in David at this time was one of humility. And here we see somebody in a humble posture. But when you're a shepherd, or you're a miner, or you're a worker of some sort, you never quite get above your station. You never forget where you started. You never forget that actually you spent those days and months amongst the sheep, protecting them. And one of the reasons that the previous king was rejected by God, why Saul was rejected, was because he didn't have humility. He kind of got above himself. He was anointed as king, and he thought then that he could do anything. And he actually even got a bit impatient, do you remember, and was waiting for Samuel to do the sort of priestly sacrifice. He got in and did it himself because, well, I'm the king, I can get on with it. But David knew all about humility, and as a shepherd, he'd learned. And within his family, he'd been treated as the youngest, the lowest of his family. The third characteristic is courage. He had to be brave. As Sonia said, he'd have to fight off the animals. And we'll learn next week exactly how brave he was in confronting Goliath, and that great story. But he didn't just suddenly get to a point where he became brave because, he saw Goliath and he thought he would fight him. It built up. He had to be tough. He had to be courageous. He had to be brave in order to protect his sheep. And then finally, the fourth characteristic is his leadership. And this image, I like this image because if you're leading, you have to have people following, right? There's problems in leadership if people aren't following the leader. And of course, that sort of style of shepherd in those days of Israel would not be one of, it would be one of striding forwards and leading the way for the sheep to follow. So he knew all about leadership, and we see later on in his life how important that was. He was an incredibly good leader of people. The other thing that David received was God's promise. Towards the end of 2 Samuel, Samuel's 7, God promises to him and says to him, "Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever." He said, not only are you going to be king, but actually your offspring, your son's going to be king, and their sons are going to be king. And so that was the great, great promise. Now we know that things didn't go as well for the kings of Israel. That's a whole other story. But I wonder about you and me and how our experience shapes us. How what has happened to us in the past or even in the present is actually shaping us. You know, whether that's what we do for a living, or whether it's within our family, or whether it's just some of our life experiences. And I think that's whatever age you are. If you're young, God is shaping you. And if you're middle-aged, God is still working with you. And if you're older, hey, God is using your experiences, but we're all still learning things, aren't we? Rupert, before the service, while we were praying, had this sense of, God nursing us as a newborn baby and singing to us and having that sort of hope of what it is that we would become. And that lovely thing and that lovely picture of how it is for a parent, a young mum, to have all those hopes and aspirations of what's to come. Now, a lot of that is around wanting, your child to be healthy, to be well, to be loved, and just to grow and prosper. And that's what God wants for us. He wants us to grow and prosper and continue to grow and prosper. And he uses good times and challenging times and bad times to help to make the best version of you that there is, to make the best version of you. So you may have experience of looking back and thinking, I now understand why I went through that, why that job change, which I didn't really enjoy, and I only stayed there for a little time, where that fits into the picture. How God has used some tragedy in my life, and how God has actually used other people to encourage me, to nurture me, and sometimes to challenge me. And as we look forward, whatever our age, I just encourage us to seek God, to see what God is calling us to do and to be, to do and to be. Now, last year, we had a weekend away, and we went to Adam Henson's farm in the Cotswolds. You know who Adam Henson is? Yeah, from Country Farm, yeah. And it was lambing season. So we went into this huge barn, and there were all these sheep in there who were pregnant or had just given birth. And the shepherd was mic'd up like this, and he was walking around, and he was telling us all about the sheep and lambing and what was happening, telling us about the different colour markings, how the colour blue meant that there was one lamb that would be born, and there were twins if it was red. And so we were watching, and as we watched, the sheep started to give birth. And the shepherd actually broke off in talking to us and went over because there was a little bit of a problem. And this lamb wasn't coming out as easily as it might have done. She'd already given birth, the sheep had already given birth to one lamb, and that was fine. But the second, it was a little problematical. And he just stopped what he was doing, went over and just observed and just waited to see whether he needed to help out or not. And actually he didn't. The sheep gave birth to the second lamb. Naturally, he didn't need to intervene. But he told us a little bit about what happens when a shepherd dies, because we learned a lot about what it means being a shepherd. It's a really, really big commitment. And so whenever a shepherd dies, when they prepare his body and put that body in the coffin, they take some wool and they put it in the palm of his hand, so that when he gets to heaven, he's able to open his hand and say, I was the shepherd. I didn't get to church too much, but I was a shepherd. Now, David's experience as a shepherd boy shaped him to become one of the greatest kings. In fact, I think the greatest king that Israel ever had. He was a man after God's heart. Though he did make some big mistakes. He was a great warrior, a great leader. He was a musician, a psalmist. Yet he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot his roots as a shepherd and all that he learnt from that experience. And of course, his most famous psalm builds upon that experience as a shepherd. And we're going to finish with this psalm now. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.